In this video, we are going to learn 3 different ways to deploy Artemis into the Kubernetes cluster. We are going to deploy in a K3S cluster. Firstly, we are going to learn to use kubectl commands to do the whole deployment. After that, we are going to learn to use Yaml files and deploy the Artemis using these Yaml files. And then after that, we are going to look at Helm Charts and use Helm Charts to deploy Artemis. You will find the link to this document from our blog down below. We need to start by creating a namespace. So this is the command we will use, create namespace. And it says the namespace was created. Next, we want to see what namespaces there are on this cluster. So we will run this command, get namespaces, and we see Artemis 01 is there. So we have created the namespace. And then we can also use this command to describe the namespace. I'm going to pipe it into a less so it doesn't waste screen. And it tells us what the label is, and it also tells us that this namespace is active. That's fine. Now let's continue. Now we're going to create a deployment using Artemis, ActiveMQ Artemis. This is a Docker image, and this is going to deploy it from the Docker repository. So let's take this line. We are going to run this. It should create us a deployment. And it says it's created the deployment. So next we want to do is we want to view the deployment. So we're going to run this command here. Kubectl get all, and -n is a short for namespace Artemis 01. So that's the name of our namespace. And if we do this command, we see that we've created a deployment. In so doing, we've also created pod. The pod is going to be like a server that runs this deployment. Next, we need to create the service. So we will run this command to create the service. Let's have a look at this. We are using the kubectl create service command, and we are specifying that we are creating a service called broker Nico. If you look at the deployment, we created a deployment called broker Nico. And if you look, there it is, broker Nico. And the pod was also called broker Nico with some additional string added to the name. So let's go now and create the service. And it said the service was created. So now we should run this command, kubectl get services, and then the namespace Artemis 01. And if we do that, we should find a service called broker Nico. There it is. And it's running on this machine. This is a machine that Kubernetes created. That IP address is unique to the Kubernetes installation. It's not a physical server. After doing that, we may want to access the Kubernetes from outside, like through the browser. And to do that, we need to expose the service. Now, there are 2 ways to expose the service. We can expose the service using node port, or we can expose the service using a load balancer. When we use node port, it will create a different IP address. We'll see that very soon. So let's run this command. And we've created a node port. Let's run the get services again. And now you see we've got broker Nico and broker Nico -NP. That one is the node port. And you can see also it's mapping port 8161 to a strange port 31974, and it is in that range that the node port maps. Even the previous one, when we created the service Nico, we also specified node port in there. If you look in the command over there, we said node port, and it actually also mapped it to port 30,000. Now we're going to use the load balancer. So we're now going to expose the service using a load balancer. When we do that, the IP will be preserved. So let's do this now. You see here, the port is 8161 and the target port, in other words, the external port that accesses the service, is also 8161. So let's deploy this service. And it says it was exposed. So now let's go and get services. And here we now have broker Nico load balancer. Now, before I clean this up, I just want to make a comment, and that is the conclusion. It is not a good idea to use these commands, and the reason is you're going to create deployments that are not repeatable. It is better to use YAML files so that every time you deploy, you're using the same YAML files. And then you can get repeatability. We are now going to use YAML files to deploy Artemis into the Kubernetes cluster. We need to create a directory called Artemis02 and change to that directory. I've already done that. Here you can see I am in Artemis02, that directory. Then we need to run the kubectl command, get namespaces. And we can see that there's no Artemis namespace. And with that, we can now create the Artemis namespace 02. And we've run the kubectl create namespace command, and it said that the namespace was created. Next, we need to create the YAML files. The first file we need to create is the config.map.yaml. So that is the command. I'm just going to say nano. I already have this file on my server, but let's open it up. And you will put this content into that file. You can see it's there. After that, we create the persistent volume claims YAML file. And we put this into that file as it is there. The next resource file we need is the deployment file. So let's create that nano deployment. I should have this file. There it is. And you would copy this content. Now, this page is my blog. We have a link down below to this page. So have a look at that. And we are now looking at chapter 2 using YAML files. So there it is. And there's one more we need, two more we need. We need the service. And what I have here is in there, that's there. So that's fine. The last one we need is the ingress. And you can see that we are going to specify TCP as the protocol. And it's going to have a relative path / and the name will be Artemis. So let's save this. Having done that, we now need to apply these files. So it's because we created the namespace Artemis02, all these files, when we apply them, we are going to create resources in that namespace. So later on, when we run a kubectl get all with that namespace, we'll be able to see everything that happened on the server. So let's start by applying the config map. Followed by the namespace, which you can get over here. If you name your files exactly as that, you can then just paste the commands in. Out. So that's fine. Now we run it, and it's created our config map resource. The next one we need to run is the persistence volume claim. So we can run the same command and just change this for the persistence. PE tab, enter. And it's created us the persistence volume. Now next is the deployment. And we've created the deployment. Service is next. Service. So let's do the same. It's created the service. And the last one is the ingress. And let's run it, and we've created the ingress. Now we've basically deployed the application. We can now verify it. So let's run this command. And you can see I have a load balancer. That is the ports. And this is the IP. Unfortunately, the protocol for this is TCP. I can't curl this from my terminal. But if somebody knows how to do this, please can you put a comment down below? I would love to update this document so that other people can get the benefit. Another command I'm going to run is get all. I'm going to run get all. This will show us everything. You can see we've created a pod. This was created when we did the deployment. You can see we created a service. We specified in the service as well as in the ingress file that it would be a load balancer. So ingress looked after the back end and service made these ports available. If you look here, this is my first and my second and my third worker nodes. And also the deployment apps Artemis, so that's there. And we also created a replica set. So everything is there. Now there is one more thing we need to do, and that is the cleanup. I normally get a list of the namespaces so that I can make sure I delete the right one. So I run this command, kubectl get namespaces. And you can see there's Artemis 02. The next command is kubectl delete namespace and then that one. So here, kubectl delete namespace Artemis 01. I'm going to type it by hand. This is the command you run, kubectl delete namespace Artemis 01. We want to delete that namespace, and by doing that it will delete everything deployed in that namespace. This is the best way to clean up your cluster. It takes a few seconds. I do have a comment to make about this method of deploying Artemis. I found it extremely difficult to find any working solution using YAML files. I basically trawled through tons of websites when I was doing my research for this and found very little working examples. So this was probably the most difficult of all the three methods to get to work. I definitely recommend you look at the next method, which is the one I found the most reliable, and that is to use the Helm chart. We are now going to install Artemis using a Helm chart that we will deploy from a repository on the internet. Before we can show you how to do this, you need to have Helm installed on your server. If you do not have Helm installed on your server, have a look at the link below to a YouTube article that we produced showing you how to do that. One of the benefits of using Helm charts is that usually the organizations that create the applications also provide support giving us the Helm charts. You can also use companies like VMware. They have what they call their Bitnami Helm charts. In this case, we are going to be using this ActiveMQ Helm chart. Now, before we can do that, we need to add the repository to our server. So let's go and copy this command and run it. I've already installed it on my server, so my server should give me a warning. Yes, there's the warning. Now, before you install any Helm chart from the internet, it's a good practice to test it. We do that by using the Helm template command. So this is the command. Now let me explain it to you. We are providing a deployment name there, and then this is the repository and the folder on the repository. So let's run this. If there's a problem, we'll get an error message. If it's successful, we'll get back YAML. It was successful. Now, what you can do is when you run this command, you can pipe it. So we are now going to pipe this command into a file called Artemis deployment.yaml. And we can list that file with less. And now you can see we got the whole YAML file, which is documenting our deployment. This is actually documenting your Kubernetes deployment. This means that the Helm chart is good. So the next step is to install it. Notice we used the Helm template command. Now we'll use the same command but the Helm install command. The rest will be the same. And this was successful. It told us that it was deployed. and it's given us some details about the deployment, and it also tells you how to get your password if you run this command. So I'm happy with that. Let's have a look in the cluster and see all the Helm charts that are installed. To do that, we run the Helm list command, which is this command here. And you can see I've got two Helm charts deployed. I've got an Elasticsearch Helm chart and now this Helm chart here. This is now Artemis Nico. It has now been installed. Having successfully deployed the Helm chart, we may want to access this information again. And now it's gone. So to do that, we will use the Helm status command. So this is the command, Helm status, and the name of the Helm chart, the deployment name. And there you have this information again. Now let's clean up the cluster. To do that, we're going to do a Helm list. It's always good to do this so that you get the correct name, and then we do a Helm delete, and this is the command we want to run. I prefer to type it by hand. After running the Helm list command, we can now run the Helm delete command. And the deployment name is that. It's now told us it's uninstalled. So if I go run Helm list now, you can see it's gone. It's been uninstalled. Thank you for watching this video. We trust you found this content interesting. Please give us a like, subscribe to our channel so that our channel can grow. Thank you.